Here it is, epic build number 2 here on Tabletop Witchcraft. My rendition of the Roman Colosseum. And like all my builds, every level is playable, from the stands to the fighting floor, even underneath the floor in the prison area. That's this week on Tabletop Witchcraft. Hey there, and welcome back to Tabletop Witchcraft. I hope you are as excited to watch this video as I was to make the Colosseum. It was a lot of fun, and it's got a ton of uses. The two main ones, obviously the first one is a fighting arena for your game sessions. But the second one, this makes a great centerpiece for your game table. A way to store all of your favorite painted miniatures, as well as maybe a way to immortalize all those PC minis that you vanquished at the hands of your awesome DM power. Now, I want to thank Reaper Miniatures for supplying most of the minis for this video. Thank you very much. They really add the awesome effect and the feel of the Colosseum, using those minis as the statues going around the entire outside. Now, there are plans available in the description below. You can grab those. You got to print those out on 24 by 36 inch paper. You can go to places like Staples, or there's a ton of places online where you can just upload the file and they'll print those out and mail them to you, so you can get them that way. The file was just, and the plan was just way too big to get it to you on smaller, like 11 by 17 paper. So, gotta print that out on big paper. And finally, like all of my epic builds, this one has a really great montage at the end of it you don't want to miss out. So, let's go grab some supplies and let's get crafting. Okay, so here is what one of the sheets look like that you will get if you download the plans in the description below. And it is all of the rings that we're going to cut out for the Colosseum. Now, when I say ring, basically the Colosseum is a bunch of ovals that we're going to cut out. Ring 1 starts at the bottom. It's the base floor of the Colosseum. It's cut out here on 1/2 inch XPS foam. And we're going to work our way all the way to the top, ring 7. And those other rings are going to be cut out on 2 inch XPS foam. Now, as we get closer and closer to the top of the Colosseum, as you can see, we're basically going to just trim down this stencil and make it smaller and smaller. And as we do that, the interior portion of the stencil will also have to get cut out. I'm using 2 inch XPS foam, and I'm just putting a little bit of hot glue to hold these together. I put 3 or 4 dabs on there, and it was kind of a pain to get off, so maybe just 2. You need more than 1, so maybe just 2 would be fine. Now when you cut this, you want the heat hot enough that it cuts through nicely, but you're not going to be pulling too hard, because then the wire will pull at an angle and you won't have nice vertical face on the Colosseum. And the reason we're gluing these together is because rings 2 and 3 are going to form basically the first floor of the Colosseum. Now this oval that you see cut out is going to be the playable interior underneath the fighting floor, underneath the sands. And this ring that we're cutting out for ring 3, which is going on top of that, is basically going to give us a little lip that we can rest the Colosseum floor on, so that we can have that obviously be the playable area for all of our battles. So just cut right into the foam there. Don't worry about that cut right there. We got to cut this piece out anyway for the Colosseum floor, which is ring 3. Unfortunately, we can't slice that last piece in half, so we got to recut that using the stencil on 1/2 inch foam, because that is the thickness of our Colosseum floor. Alright, now we are moving on to the second level of the Colosseum. So rings 4 and 5, again, we glue them together, cut them out on the Proxon, and then cut the interior out as well. And I have a little trick for cutting out the interior without having to cut through the XPS foam, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later. So you might want to use that method instead of cutting through like you see here. So all we're doing is just making the ring smaller and smaller the closer we get to the top. Alright, so one of the steps that I didn't actually show in the video, but I want to talk about, which is kind of important, is sanding down the foam. Once you get all these rings cut out, you're going to want to sand these down. Even though you went ahead and put some hot glue on them, and they really do cut out very evenly, there's still going to be some waves in it, and you get a nice round look to the Colosseum if you go ahead and sand this down. You're going to want to use some 320 or 400 grit sandpaper, use a sanding block, and just go nice and slow over the whole thing. If you go too fast, you're going to get a buildup of XPS foam dust, which I'll talk about more in a second. But that's going to get underneath the sanding block. It's going to build up, it's going to warm up, and it's going to gum a little bit. And as you're rubbing it, you're going to start getting some tears. You can kind of see right here, maybe it's started to tear a little bit. Nothing that you can't fix, but as long as you go nice and slow, you shouldn't have any problem with that. Now the dust, real quick, I just wanted to mention, you don't want to be breathing this stuff in. It doesn't break down. You don't want to get it in your lungs. It's not going to go anywhere if it does. So you want one of these masks. If you can find it, pick them up online. It's a 3M mask, and it does a really good job keeping all that stuff out. So make sure you're wearing a mask, sand these down, and let's keep moving. So this is going to be the arch for going around the entire Colosseum on both the first and second level. Now this stencil is going to allow us to place that arch evenly around the entire perimeter of the Colosseum. So once we have those sections marked out, we put rings 2 and 3 together, copy the stencil over, as you can see here. Now I'm using this hot wire knife to basically just trace that stencil out onto the foam. Now the plans will also show the proper depth that you want to burn into this section, as well as sections 4 and 5. That way you don't end up going through to the other side of the Colosseum. And you want to keep all of these uniform in depth as well. Obviously it'll look a lot better. So once you have that cut out, or burned out I should say, then we're going to use our Olfa knife to get some nice straight cuts in the back. And using this sculpting tool, it worked absolutely awesome to scrape off all of the little wisps of the XPS foam. And just run your shop vac next to it. It'll pull all that out of there and clean it up nicely. Now we're on to the second level. Cutting that out the same as we did on the first. Now here's that little secret I was going to tell you, I told you about earlier. Basically, you cut a little hole out on the inside of the foam that you don't need. Take the wire out of your Proxxon, feed it through the hole, make your cut, and then turn it off obviously and pull the wire out. Now you have a solid continuous cut for ring 7 without any lines through it. Now we're going to measure out the center of the Colosseum for our Imperial box, the video we did a few weeks ago. So we just want to mark that out, cut that section out with the Olfa knife, placing the sans floor back in so we get the proper height on the floor that we have to cut, and we're going to cut that section out as well, again with the Olfa knife. Now this texture roller is in the same video as that little roller we used just a few moments ago, and I'll put a link to that just to add a bunch of texture to the Colosseum. Now you can use a knife obviously, or a hot wire knife to cut that little tab out, but that's going to allow us to remove the Colosseum floor when we want to access the prison area down below. Now I'm using Eileen's tacky glue, and everybody knows I'm a big fan of hot glue, but this is definitely not a situation where you want to use that. It takes a few minutes to really line this up properly and get it looking exactly how you want it. Hot glue would not work here. It would set way too fast. So just put some tacky glue on both sides of the foam and just press it together. And we're going to just start piecing all of this together finally, and feel like we're actually kind of starting to get somewhere. So you can see I've got that tacky glue on both sides, helps it stick a little bit better. Okay, that's going to help us obviously put our grid on the Colosseum fighting floor, the sands. Obviously skip this if you don't play with a grid system. Now I'm using this circle cutter to cut out some pillars for some decoration around the Colosseum. And the exact dimensions again are in the plans, but I believe it's maybe about 1.5 inch pillar here. And we're just going to shave off some sections around this pillar to glue to the Colosseum. Now you can find in the description below a link to all of my Amazon links for everything you see in this video that I've used, all the tools, equipment, and so on. Now this one we're going to cut a little bit thicker than the pillar because this is going to be the base and the top of each pillar going around the Colosseum. So you're going to need quite a few of these. Now you can see we're starting to cover up a lot of these seams here, and we're going to get real sneaky in just a minute and hide that other seam that you see as well. This stencil you can pull off of the plan. It'll allow us to get nice even stonework around the Colosseum. And we're going to draw nice big stone slabs, cutting them out with an X-Acto knife to exaggerate the lines here, and then using a pen to define them. And it's going to hide the actual seam of the two pieces of XPS foam perfectly, and it's going to look awesome when we're done. Now, you know, every build I do has to have magnets in it, or almost every build. I throw a couple in here. Really, this doesn't hold the Colosseum together. It does in a way, but basically it allows us to snap it in place easily when it's in use or we're storing it. Now I'm just cutting out this template here to put the archway around the entrance to the Colosseum. And that white piece of foam in the background is dollar store foam core that I'm using to just put some wood grain on. And I've been using these rhinestones quite a bit. They do a really nice job with some decoration or embellishment on the piece. Now these are supposed to look like supports that are kind of like holding up or going around the Colosseum. And you notice I have a cut or a split at the center of each column. That's to make it look like the columns are actually holding them up and in place. And using the stencil for the main door or the gate, we can use that to cut out the section for that support right there. Now, if you're not picking the plans up, just pause the video. This is a real funky piece, but it's kind of a little support that's going to hold up the flag poles or the awning poles here in just a little bit. And you can make all these cuts with an Olfa knife. You don't need the Proxxon, but for a build this big, I'd recommend saving up your pennies and picking one up. Alright, super important. Do not put that barbecue skewer in the center of that piece that we're putting on. Put it off to the side and only put hot glue where you saw it in the video right there, because this whole top is going to be removable because we don't want the awning on when we're actually playing in the Colosseum. So all these pieces right here are going to hold the awning posts up, and they're also going to hold, the whole top of the Colosseum together. But if you put those skewers in the center, they're going to be in the way here in just a minute. You'll see what I'm talking about. Now I want a little bit more artistic creation in that arch, so I just put an arch to it instead of making those straight. And then in between each one of those supports, I just cut a little rectangular window out. You've seen this technique in the castle build video. I'll put a link up above to that, where we just basically score out some XPS foam with an X-Acto. Using these clay sculpting tools, we can then, add some depth to those windows. And then just to get even more fancy, we're going to put some more stone supports around the ring 7, which would be the top of the Colosseum. Now we're going to move on to the interior of the Colosseum. This is going to be like a railing that's going to go around the entire second and third level, I guess, of the interior. And you'll see why here in just a minute while we cut that little lip out. And that shape right there is going to be the posts that are going to go between the railing supports. And again, you're going to need a handful of these, and you can see why the Proxxon is a nice tool to have. Now we can just bend these and get them right in place. And don't worry about the little, I guess, crinkle in the foam. I think that looks really nice. It looks like cracks in the stonework a little bit. And just keep in mind on this section and on the opposite side for the railing, you don't want to overhang that one because that's where the Imperial box goes. Now you can skip this step if you want, but the little tears in the foam on that base there were kind of getting to me. You're never really going to see them, but I just wanted to pretty it up a little bit for when the Imperial box was pulled out of the Colosseum. So I just took a piece of chipboard, painted it black, and I placed that right in there. Alright, we can't get any easier than this. We're basically just carving the door right into the Colosseum wall, putting some woodwork around the outside of it to give the illusion that, it's a separate piece, a separate door. And here's a little fancy green stuff doorknob that I had made laying around. As you know, I have a bunch of those, as well as these metal bracing. I'll put a link up above as to how I make all of these. I make a whole bunch ahead of time, that way it doesn't slow me down while I'm trying to, move along here with these builds. Alright, now we're going to work on the stairs. We're going to do stairs on the left and right side of the Colosseum. A little bit of a funky cut here. We're going to use the stencil to get our main cut. This black piece that you can see here that's been cut out in the stencil or marked out on it on the foam is for one of the railing post supports. You'll see here in just a second. There we go. So it fits on really nice. Basically just use the stencil and get that cut out perfectly. Do a dry fit before you put the glue on it and you'll be all set. For the back of the Imperial box, I wanted to raise this wall up just a little bit. That way it made a little bit more sense, like the crowd basically couldn't just jump down and get on top of wherever the Emperor or the King was going to be. And it also helps with fitting the pergola from the Imperial box into this section. Now, as we did with the windows earlier, basically I just scored this out with an X-Acto knife using the clay sculpting tool here to dig into the foam about 1/8 of an inch, because we are going to insert some granny grading here to add some more detail to the walls of the Colosseum. And again, this item along with all others will be in the description below. So here again, I just cut out the door to access the Colosseum floor right into the foam. Super easy. And we're going to score our woodwork, our grain right into that. And we're going to get sneaky here again with the door in just a second. So as you can see, I'm putting some hot glue right on this seam, and I'm going to put a piece of foam across to act as part of the wood door. And now you're never going to see the seam right where the door is when it's in play. So it's all about trying to hide these seams creatively in this build. Now we'll hide the seam between the layer here that I'm cutting out and the next layer up, or actually the layer below it, simply by use of paint and pigments here in just a minute. Now that's the door to access the prison area down below. I just carved that out with the clay sculpting tool, made a door out of dollar store foam core, and recessed that right into place. The stencil that you'll get with the plans is a digital stencil. It's been drawn out so it's evenly spaced and looks really nice. This was just me working it on the fly. But again, I'm using that technique where I cut a hole out in the center and then use the Proxxon to cut out the prison cell openings, and then turn the Proxxon off, pull the wire out, and I got a nice clean cut without a hole in it. Okay, so let's work on the awning, or get started on it anyway. We're going to mark the hole where the awning is going to go through, like so, and we're going to use this little wooden stencil here to get an accurate location to drill through the ring 7, or the top layer of the Colosseum, around the whole thing so that the awning posts are vertical and line up nicely. And these are just barbecue skewers that I'm using. And as you can see, this is why if we put that support earlier in the center of these pieces, it would have been in the way for not only that vertical section for the awning, but these pieces as well. And I'm using that wooden stick there in my left hand also as a jig to make sure all of these are cut at the same length. And then I just made these pieces right here to add some more detail to the top, making sure not to glue that wooden stick in place. I'm using that just as a guide to get them lined up over the hole properly. Alright, a build this big has to have some green stuff sculpting in it. These are going to be what the awning ropes are going to line up and go through and over. And on the sides of each one, I like to put a little hole, look like maybe, you know, a rivet or something's holding them up. I painted the tops brass color, and then dark brown for the post. And I'm using some Vallejo. It's like a burnt umber wash, and added a nice rich brown color to these posts. And I dry brushed those posts in a gold color. Alright, super important. Dry brushing is not always the answer. I left this in to show you what the Colosseum would look like dry brushed, and I didn't like it, so I went back and I repainted the entire Colosseum. Yes, the entire Colosseum I painted twice. I didn't like it. I wasn't a fan of the way that looked. It's not bad, but if you want to know how I painted the Colosseum, I'll put a link above to the Imperial box. Follow that paint scheme for painting the Colosseum. It comes out much better. Now we want to break up the Colosseum wall on the interior, so I'm using this dark maroon color, and then we're going to use sort of a charcoal black to go around that. I just thought that it was way too much of this tan color, so I just decided to go with the black and some red. Found some decent pictures online too of some designs like this from some illustration. It looked really nice. And I'm just doing some light dry brushing here of a lighter gray around the edge. Alright, now we're working on the Colosseum floor. This is a technique you might have seen in my fort and barracks video. I'll put a link up above to that. And basically I did a really heavy coat of Mod Podge and black paint, And then I actually put baking soda and super glue on this entire base to give that swirl effect. It doesn't melt the foam because of that heavy coat of Mod Podge. Now we're going to use my favorite dry brush here for all my terrain, and use this parchment color to just do a nice light dry brush over the entire thing. And then my favorite, pigments. I absolutely love using pigments. We're going to use this to just lightly brush and dab all over the Colosseum floor. We're going to use this light tan color and then this burnt umber. Now for some embellishments. I had this laying around. It's a sword with the handle broken off. I painted that up, pushed that into the sands, as well as a couple Citadel skulls. I figured I'd paint them up and get them in there as well. Once those were in place, a light misting of alcohol. Just 3 light squirts on there. That's it. You don't need anything else to activate it and kind of hold it and lock it in place. When we hit this up with some matte varnish later on, that will also help lock it in place. Now obviously the wall cannot be painted and no, sand on it. So we got to take some more pigment and really dirty that up to make it look believable. And for the awning post, I'm just using a little bit of PVA glue. And don't worry about the excess, just take a Q-tip or a tissue and clean that up. Okay, follow that dimension there for the rope. It's a 16-inch long piece, a solid 9-inch section, and then split 7 inches down in length into 2. And that's how we're going to hold all of the awning up around the Colosseum. Now I've painted this first, just put a latex glove on and wipe the tan paint right into the butcher's twine. And then I went and I did another application of paint over that split after I took it apart. Now this is just some electrical wire that I used for the interior ring. Used the plan to get that laid out correctly. Now we're making the cuts for the awning. As you can see, I'm going all the way to the back edge of the plan, so we have a little bit of a droop in the awning. And that's just a split ring that I'm wrapping around each corner. The front 2 corners of each piece of the awning. You've seen this technique if you've seen the Imperial box video as well. Now I'm going to take this really heavy needle. It's got a specific name. I forget what it's called. If you know what it's called, leave it in the comments below. But we're basically just going to sew the awning right into place. Alright, so we're going to work our way around the Colosseum, one awning piece at a time. And once we've gotten all the way to the end, as you can see here, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm just using a little bit of super glue to hold this rope in place. Okay, back to our pigment. We need to make this look like it's been bleached in the sun. It's had some sand or dirt. It's been used up for a while. When the Colosseum was in use, this was actually lowered down, so it would be dirty and sun bleached. Basically just put some pigment on there, tap it into place, and it looks really nice. Now you're going to need some help for this part. My wife is actually off camera holding up the ring for the awning. With that being held up, you can kind of work your way around the Colosseum, wrapping the other side of the rope on there. A little bit of super glue and you should be all set. Now, depending on where you're going to use this Colosseum, the nice part about this is all of these flags are removable. They're all held on just with these split rings. So those black eagles go with the Tristan logo from my Imperial box, and this arrow and this sword and shield banners are just for the entrance into the Colosseum. Now we're just going to use some split rings to make these supports here, and just cut that bottom piece of that flag to fit so it's not drooping on the ground. Now we're going to add some rust effect to these metal plates for the chain and the prison area down below. Drip some of that rust onto the wall. This is the same as what we used for the awning. Instead of using the split ring, I just stuck some toothpicks in, and you'll see we'll use those to slide the chain on. And that fit really snug. It was nice. I honestly didn't even really probably need to put any type of glue on here, but I touched each end up with a little bit of super glue just to make sure. Alright, now in my book, this is extremely important. Working with these pigments here around the base of the Colosseum really makes this piece, it brings the whole thing together. Really makes it awesome. I was standing back looking at it and I was like, geez, this really needs something. It looked just too uniform. And putting this dark brown pigment in the corners of the Colosseum just to me was the icing on the cake. I absolutely love the way it turned out. And I use this technique everywhere around the Colosseum, around the top ring, on the roof section, obviously here on the stairs, around the railing, everywhere. Really breaks out that definition. Alright, Reaper, thank you for supplying these miniatures. Here's a whole list of them. And basically what you want to do here, some of these are bones, I have a couple metal ones. Once you get these out, just cut away any of the lines that you might find on it. Give them a good wash in the sink with some warm water. And then any swords that might be bent, like this guy right here, put them in some hot water. It'll straighten out. Dip them in ice water and you're good to go. Then do that about 30 more times. For basing these guys, I just put a little super glue on the base, and as you can see, I'm about to dab a little bit of accelerant just to help me keep moving. I had a lot of miniatures here to paint. So I put a black base primer on these miniatures, and I'm doing almost like a zenithal prime with a black brown by Vallejo. The goal here is to make these look like stone. So now I'm using a lighter gray to, again, almost like a zenithal prime the miniature. So I guess really the brown, I kind of did almost 100% of it with that brown. Then zenithal prime with that lighter gray. Now I'm just doing some highlights with an even lighter gray here. Now we're going to take some Agrax Earthshade and wash all of the miniatures. And once that dries, we go back to my favorite dry brush, and it worked really well here for dry brushing these minis. And I'm using a light tan color to dry brush them. And while the paint was a little bit tacky still, again, I'm not using a lot of paint here, I went back and to the pigments, and it really made these guys look like stone. These came out really, really nice. So while that's still a little tacky, I grabbed a mixture of a light tan and dark brown pigment, and now I'm just wiping that onto the miniatures, and it really gave them a nice stone look and texture. So there you have it, epic build number 2 in the books here on Tabletop Witchcraft. This build is extremely rewarding to step back and look at this piece once it's all done. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I know you can do it. Now, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Please hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on any further videos here on Tabletop Witchcraft. And consider heading on over to Patreon, where I've got a couple of different tiers you can choose from, and it's support on sites like that really help this channel grow and evolve, as well as picking up those plans for this video to help you along. Alright, until next time, I'll see you around.